Looks like the attendee trickle in is slowing down, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. A few housekeeping things to get started. Really encourage everyone, feel free to use the chat tools. You can message just host and panelists. That's just me and our host, Seth, on the Integral account. Or you can message everybody. Strongly encourage heckling of the webinar presenter. I have to tell you, I do not get heckled enough when I'm presenting. Even better if it's contentful heckling that gets other people thinking, that shares what you know about the topic, that helps us see the topic in a different way than I'm seeing it, or adds to the way that I'm sharing. Feel free to just throw all that in the chat, and that allows you to interact with each other. Hope everyone gets a chance to kick back, get comfy, eat some lunch if it's that time for you, some breakfast if it's that time for you on the other coast. Thank you for being here and spending this time together. I'm excited to talk about chainsaws and generative AI and agility in a changing tool landscape for us in knowledge work. Also, you will get a copy of the materials. We'll send out the slides that I'm sharing, and we're also recording this webinar. We'll post that on Integral's YouTube channel. If you need to watch it a second or a third time or share it with everyone you know, feel free to do so. I'd be grateful. You can also post questions via the question and answer, or you can post questions directly in the chat. Feel free to do either of those as well. Hi, I'm Paul. I am a senior product manager here at Integral. I lead teams of software engineers, other product managers, product designers, and we work on developing software for our clients. And obviously, we're seeing a lot of ways that generative AI is changing how we're doing the work we do. And so I'm excited to talk with you about that today. Before we get sawing, perhaps more accurately, I don't know, TBD. A word on other terms besides chopping, chainsawing, whatever else is useful here. So sometimes I have to acknowledge, when I see these acronyms, I feel like I'm about to start talking about the differences between llamas and alpacas for some reason, always, every time I see this group of acronyms, it happens to me. Personally, I'm Team Alpaca. My time that I got to visit Peru, hiked the Inca Trail, the alpacas are way better than the llamas, in my personal opinion. However, these are not terms about alpacas or llamas, it turns out. Our AI, artificial intelligence, honestly, it's a bit broad for me. It's hard to nail down what is and isn't AI. We've been using the term for decades. And so I often seek to use something more specific. For example, this talk is about generative AI or GAI, and how it's impacting folks that do knowledge work, specifically software development. All of these computerized AI tools, like generative AI and others, are built using a type of software called machine learning. And it's pretty, for those of you that are familiar with it, this may be too basic, but to give the rest of us some grounding, it's pretty straightforward, but also very complex. Can take some logical rules. Those are the algorithms that you hear people talk about. And you take those rules, give them to a computer, and then give it a giant pile of some kind of data. And you ask the computer to learn using those rules from that data, and then perform some kind of task using those learnings. What's exciting and new in the last couple of years are generative AI tools. We've known this is what we're working towards for a while now, using machine learning, that you can talk to almost like they're a person. They've gathered enough data from the internet. They've been given enough rules to help them do what we might do with each other as expert intellectual workers, software developers, etc. So generative AI tools like LLMs, large language models, do that with language. They will hear your question in normal language and seek to answer it in normal language. Well, they can also often do things in giving you text in a CSV file, or take in text in a CSV file, or things like that. But they're all text-based, the LLMs, large language models. There's also other generative AI tools that do more with like imagery, as many of you have seen. You can give it a few words or phrases or a few sample images, and it can produce an image for you. For most of this talk, I'm going to focus entirely on generative AI and really LLMs that we use like they're another person that we're talking with to get intellectual work done as we're building software. It's also worth noting there are other very specific types of generative AI within specific tools, like GitHub has Copilot for helping you with understanding your code or writing tests in code. Google has been adding tools to Google Drive and Google Suite that help you build documents, write emails, etc. So there's also lots of very purpose-built specific generative AI tools that generate an outcome based on using machine learning under the hood. There won't be any quizzes on the end in any of these terms, but I just thought it would be helpful to give us some foundations there. Encourage you, if you're new to some of this, to do some research and develop your own ways of using these terms very intentionally that are recognized in the industry. They're worth getting familiar with. It'll also help you with how you learn how to use the tools as well, deciding which things or searching for which things will serve you well. All right, so let's go ahead and get shopping. Wild statement to start with, I know, but intellectual work is being disrupted. Obviously, since the pandemic, things have been really crazy. But even before the pandemic, as much as maybe 10, 15 years, 20 years before the pandemic, global work, distributed teams, remote work, digital collaboration, those were all becoming a thing for a long time before the pandemic. And then the pandemic massively accelerated seeing how much was possible. And wasn't possible for us to get done working from home. And so the way we do intellectual work is being disrupted by all of these different digital tools like Miro and Figma and Notion and Rally and Jira that we use in software development specifically. And the processes of how we do the things, like we used to do them with Post-its on a window, all gathered in a room, getting up to do activities, sitting back down to think and write, etc. We get together for webinars in a room. Even the Kanban boards, I created this one in Notion. People use them in Rally and Jira all the time now. Originally, those were Post-its on a whiteboard was the idea. And some folks even still defend that you need to be doing Post-its on a whiteboard. It has effects that the tactile physical motion matters for human psychology. The same for pairing. Pairing in software was originally explicitly sitting next to each other at the same computer, using one keyboard, one mouse to work together. And these are two early on at Integral. That was how we did it in our original office. To the integers working together in pairing in that way. Now we do it digitally. There's digital remote collaboration tools for pairing, etc. And yet at the same time, there's pushes to go back to the office. We're still learning exactly what doesn't work to do remotely, to do distributed. And I don't think we're sure yet where we're going to land. Then you throw in generative AI. Now we have these tools that can do a lot of the thinking work for us. We're still refining on how to use them. What was 2 hours of Google searching and synthesizing information, maybe you can get done in 10 minutes with an LLM tool now. And so that hour-long ideation session, do you still need it? Or could you use ChatGPT to accelerate? We're still learning how to do those kinds of things and what needs to be in person, what needs to be remote, and now where do we use generative AI and where don't we? And it's not hard to find plenty of more recent or less recent dystopian futures that we predict about how all of these computers and all of this artificial intelligence could ruin our lives. And even if you're not quite that cynical, I think most of us feel at least a little uncomfy about how something like a generative AI tool might make our skills less valuable, might negatively impact what it feels like to do our day-to-day work, how it might negatively impact how much we're paid, maybe even impact whether we're employable or not. Generative AI might take our jobs, we fear. And so it's understandable this is a massive disruption in our world that we're experiencing, and we're curious how to navigate it and a little scared. So for me, in thinking about all of that, I ended up looking to history to see if it has any lessons to offer. I was really fortunate. I grew up going for a week or two every summer with my family to camping at Algonquin Provincial Park. It's a couple hours north of Toronto. I now take my kids there every summer. They love it there as well. And there's tons of things. It's beautiful, highly recommended, stunning natural beauty there, great place. They have this logging museum there, that area of Northern Ontario, long history of logging. And so this, it's like a 1.5 mile, 2 mile trail that you walk along, has all kinds of crazy stuff. I could spend the whole talk just telling you about this logging museum. I'll keep myself as short as I can about it. About all of the old ways that they used to do logging in these giant forests. And so they have actual examples of boats and sleighs, and those aren't real horses, they're fake horses, but still. And the huts that 40 men would stay in all winter long away from their families so that they could make money and then go back to their farms for the growing season or whatever. And they show about how they used different kinds of axe blades to square off the logs so they could be floated downriver and put in ships. And then things like these crazy, as machines started to become a part of this bear engine wheel that kept them safe going down hills, yada, yada, yada. So it's this whole, like, you spend hours on this trail learning about all of the old ways of doing things. Like, as I said, I could keep going about even more of how they used to lumberjack. And then you get towards the end, and there's like one little section. at the very end that has a bunch of modern machines like trucks and tractors and things they use to move logs and whatever, and chainsaws. And that advent of modern logging is just a small section. And these are tools that are actually kind of old now. They're 50, 60 years old, some of them that they have on display, but they look pretty much similar to the modern world. And people move through this section pretty quickly, right? Even things from the 1970s, the 1980s, they look pretty familiar. We know about these kinds of tools. We see them all the time now. It's the world we know. The new normal in logging is just normal. And so this section, it's kind of funny to watch people like engrossed for hours about how they used to lumberjack, and then they go, oh yeah, I know this, quickly walk through this section and leave at the end. And yet if you think about it for a second, as all of these tools are coming to use, people have no idea what's going on, what's safe and what's not, what problems these new tools will cause, how to use them well. It must have been absolutely disorienting in the 1950s, the 1960s as modern machinery took over. Massive change. A person doing logging in 1950 wouldn't have hardly recognized how it was done in 1980, even though now today it just is our new normal that we walk through really quickly. My hunch is that in the coming years, we'll likely see similar dynamics with knowledge work generally, right? And software development specifically. In many ways, the core business of software development isn't likely to change that much though, right? Like you think about logging, people still want 2x4s and firewood and exposed beams in our homes and other kinds of forestry products for furniture and whatever. And we still cut down and slice up trees to make most of those forestry products. Similarly for us, people will keep wanting high quality working software, and likely for a lot of the same uses we use it for today, to make our own lives better, to enjoy using the software and have it help us do things, and to help make the world a better place. Yet it also seems like in the same way that logging went through what it went through 50, 60 years ago, we can probably expect that generative AI tools, digital collaboration, et cetera, are going to cause massive changes that we don't yet know where things will land in how we build what we build. So for me, that's led to starting to explore how to use generative AI well. Before I share some of what I've learned and what's been helping me think about how to use generative AI tools well in the work I do want to take a second to talk about risks. To me, this kind of feels like that part of the analogy where it's like, cool, check out this new chainsaw. Also, do not dismember your friends with the chainsaw. It's important that we think about how not to mess up the world using generative AI and how to use it well and responsibly. So generative AI's greatest power is that it's always learning, right? It takes in every single interaction it has. It continues to apply its rules. It's now got more data. It takes feedback from people. It's always learning. It's always getting better. But that also creates the greatest risk. Every conversation, every bit of data that you share with any public LLM tool like ChatGPT or Bard is part of the training of the tool. And that's part of how it keeps getting better. But that also means that you're constantly sharing whatever you're sharing effectively publicly, or certainly at least with the parent company of that tool. And because others are interacting with the same tool, it is information that the tool could use to shape what it says to other people. So it is in many ways becoming part of the public domain. Some enterprises buy their own instance of a tool, an LLM tool, and they can point it at ChatGPT or Bard or other LLM services, but it's private, right? So all of their data is inside a fence, is not used for training the tool overall, never sort of leaves the premises, so to speak. If you have an enterprise tool like that, you have a lot more latitude and have less fears about security and safety, since it's kind of inside the circle of safety and privacy, similar to like how your work email or your work Google Drive or work SharePoint has those security protections inside your work. If you don't, you certainly need to apply a lot of secure thinking to what you're going to share with a generative AI tool. Even if you're on an enterprise instance, similar to how you need to be smart with your email, smart with your cloud documents and whatever, still really important to learn how to be thoughtful about what you're sharing with an LLM. And so for me, the core of that is being aware of the data that I'm handling. Is it incredibly secret and powerful information that if someone else stole it from me, they might try to use it to take over the world with evil? Or maybe the information I'm sharing is more like Aragorn's Sword of Anduril, where you definitely want to reveal it, but at the right time, cautious about the timing here. Or maybe it's your trusty sting that glows with power and you want everyone to know you have it because they kind of already do anyways. And you're good with them being aware of that because you want them to cower in fear at your fearsome publicly known power or whatever. For the less nerdy me, that analogy doesn't hit as much. But the point is that if you think about the kind of data you're holding and its sensitivity and how much damage could be done with it, that can help you with thinking about how to share it. I like to think about chatting with a public LLM tool as if I'm having a conversation in a crowded restaurant. If it's very secret and sensitive data that could cause a lot of harm if it was shared outward, I'm going to follow the keep it secret, keep it safe rule. I may not even speak about that kind of thing in a crowded restaurant with a friend. If the data is less sensitive, I might speak about it more generically. I'll use caution and care, and say about the kind of thing I'm working on, still being careful because I know I've got some sensitive stuff to protect, but it's probably okay if someone overhears a generic version of the thing I'm talking about. And then, sure, there's some things that are like, someone could just already know that publicly by searching the internet, or they could, it's pretty harmless information because it's me talking about personal things in my life that anyone could really know and I'm not that worried about it, or whatever, things like that. Similar kind of thinking with public LLM tools, right? Know that what you're sharing with it is effectively like talking in a restaurant where anyone could overhear, get access to that information, and be thoughtful about making sure you're really careful about what you put into the tool, what data you give it. Thank you, Ryan, for the comment. Really helpful and very true. We'll talk a little bit later too as well about some of the ways that GAI, generative AI, learns, and also some of the things that companies are beginning to offer for how to train generative AI tools as well. So underlying what I just shared about kind of the principles of knowing your data and keeping it safe appropriately based on the data itself is this principle. This is actually part of our policy here at Integral for how we use tools, and it's really important to remember. It's highly unlikely that generative AI told me to do it is going to stand up as a defense for something that you did using a generative AI tool, right? I mean, they seem like a person, but the person, you're going to be held accountable, not the generative AI tool that you used a thing from. So it can be tempting to go faster. I mean, what's awesome about these tools is something that used to take a couple hours, you can have generative AI searching the internet for you and putting together a synthesized idea that you then refine on and get something done really fast. It's really exciting, right? And so you just grab all this stuff that it's giving you, copy paste it into the new policy or the document or the strategy that you're creating. The problem is if it's introducing any kind of misinformation or bias and you don't notice it, you're sharing that with your colleagues. You are now the source of misinformation or bias or unfairness or unethical, inaccurate information, whatever. Or if you don't do the work to think through the risks yourself and identify any gaps in what the generative AI tool told you, you missed a strategic gap. It's hard to say, oh, well, we failed because I didn't think past what the generative AI tool told me. So it's really important to know that you're going to be held accountable. And also the vice versa. We just talked about the security side. You're going to be held accountable for what you share with the generative AI tool. And so if you're not cautious, you might accidentally tell Sauron that Frodo has the One Ring and is headed to Mordor to destroy it and end the world. Maybe it's not that risky, but still, if you're moving too quickly, you might accidentally copy paste things into a generative AI tool that are really sensitive information and end up upsetting or causing a lot of stress and anxiety for a client because you shared some client information, or for your leadership because you shared sensitive information about the work you're doing, violating an NDA, creating a security breach, etc. So really important to be accountable on how you're handling both inputs and outputs with the generative AI tool, so that you can be accountable for your work the same as you are today. The generative AI is a tool that's helping you, and you have to be accountable to how you're using it. So looking back at the lumberjack analogy helps me identify what I think is maybe the biggest risk with generative AI tools, and the risk that I want to spend a lot of the rest of the talk hopefully helping us look at how to de-risk that risk. You think about today, the lumberjack persona is romanticized, and we think about like, oh, everybody wants to show how strong they are chopping wood, and it feels so good and primal and fierce and whatever, and it's so cool, and you want this guy in flannel to be hanging out with you, go into your Airbnb, whatever, it's so cozy. But in my experience, everybody wants to wear Carhartt until it's time to do Carhartt stuff, right? And very few of us even own an axe, much less ever swing it at a piece of wood. The reality is that the last time you interacted with an old school lumberjack, it was probably this guy at your ex-boyfriend's sister's Halloween party. The lumberjack, the old school way of doing things as a lumberjack, is a Halloween costume now. And the point for me there is that the biggest risk I see with generative AI tools is the way that we know how to do things today is going to become the old way of doing things. And the biggest risk is getting left behind on that because you don't know how to do knowledge work using these new tools, or having your entire organization struggle to compete because your teams aren't able to set up and safely and effectively use generative AI tools to keep doing work with these new tools, the same way that anyone that didn't learn how to use a chainsaw probably wasn't able to stay in the lumberjack business very long back then. So I want to talk a little bit more about how we can be the lumberjacks that win. In many senses, we're not navigating the new world of generative AI. We're actively building that future. We're kind of navigating uncharted waters, learning how these new tools work, how to use them. We are the lumberjacks learning to use the early versions of chainsaws, what jobs they do really well, what jobs they don't do so well, where to still use the old tools, how to be safe with these new tools. All of that is what we're learning as we use these tools, these generative AI tools. And so for me, I found it helpful to consider kind of waypoints, reference points of what's not likely to change and not moving so much, kind of like how a sailor uses the stars to navigate. That helps me consider what questions and what ideas I can use to navigate using generative AI and learn to use it in really smart ways. So for me, our first waypoint is noting that the core foundational principles and practices of what we're building and how we build it are unlikely to change that much. They're going to change. Of course, they'll keep evolving at the pace that they evolve at. But because we're still ultimately seeking to accomplish a lot of the same things with the software that we're building, with the intellectual work that we're doing to build it, a lot of the things that we've used are still going to be really useful. And that's helpful to me because it makes me think about, like, at Integral, we've often used diagrams like this. There's still going to be all of these principles and practices are going to be really valuable and really important, whether it's how we do code quality and TDD practices, architectural things about monoliths and microservices, agile methods for software delivery, human-centered design ideas and practices. Those are all going to continue to be incredibly important to building good software because we're seeking a lot of the same goals with the software we're building. I'd say even more generally with the intellectual work that we're doing, the definition of done for good user experience, system reliability and scalability, smart strategies for iterative and lean implementation and building and exploring how to build something right. Those are all still going to be great ways to find out what software we really need and build the really good software that our users love. And that leads me to two questions then that help me with thinking about how to use generative AI, knowing that that isn't changing. So I want to use generative AI in a way that it helps me have the greatest impact on doing things better, faster, harder, stronger in the ways that I'm doing them now, but generative AI makes me better at it. I want to find thin slices and lean experiments that help me use these tools well to do what I'm doing today. It's really easy, I think, often in thinking about these kinds of questions, as I mentioned earlier, it's understandable we have these fears of, like, oh my gosh, my entire job and all of the product managers, all the product designers, all the software engineers are going to be replaced by an army of robots at laptops. Actually, they won't be armies of robots at laptops. They'll just be on a server somewhere and never have a keyboard or a screen, but that's besides the point. We think that's what's going to happen, or we think that instead of having a team do a discovery and an ideation and design a lean implementation plan or whatever, an executive will just have a planning robot that gives that to them. But the reality is that's probably not going to happen anytime soon, if ever. And it's really important as we think about answering these questions to instead look at smaller tasks that we can truly experience a generative AI tool making us better at something. There's something I'm doing today that will be a little easier with generative AI. And so I've gone and played, and a lot of folks in our team, we've shared ideas about what we're doing, of taking something that's low value or annoying or difficult or just takes a long time, or that's difficult to get all the information expertise, and having generative AI do that for me. The other thing about that is being humble enough to know that I don't yet know exactly how to get better, faster, harder, or stronger with generative AI. And I need to experiment with that as I'm doing agile, as we're doing TDD on our code building, as we're doing human-centered design. And so finding thin little ways to experiment and play with the usage of these tools is really important for helping us figure out what actually works, what actually helps us be harder, better, faster, and stronger as we're doing the same core thing, seeking the same core goals we've been seeking. And on that note, that leads me to another waypoint, another guiding star, which is that scientific approach, growth mindset, it's going to still remain powerful. Bringing curiosity to a problem, gathering data to understand the context of that problem, risking a few experiments to find out if the assumptions and hypotheses we have about the solutions to the problem are those valuable solutions or not. Doing those experiments, gathering data about what happened, all of that in a generative AI world, all those tools and processes that we use today for experimentation and learning, those are still going to help us win in the future. And ideally, generative AI actually joins us in this process of experimentation and learning and helping us hone our craft, because the same way that I experimented and learned to get good at what I'm good at today is likely to stay the same in the future. The same way that we experiment and learn as a team to build great software is likely to stay the same in the future. That leads me to these two questions. Thinking about how can using generative AI make these mindsets of growth mindset, of experimental scientific mindset easier to learn and maintain? And where might these tools make humans weaker? How can we mitigate these risks? For that first question, I think about all the things that I might do with generative AI and that I've been starting to experiment with, like getting feedback on a roadmap or drafting a set of features and stories, ideas for how to approach building a prototype for something, or generating a list of risks for a project I'm taking on, or even like drafting an internal company policy. These are all collaborative kinds of interactions. And what I found is interesting is I can end up both playing the role of the coach, coaching ChatGPT or Bard or whatever I'm using, or the student, and flip-flop back and forth between those, which allows me to both get really valuable information from the generative AI tool, and also continue to hone my own skills and my own thinking and what I'm doing with these tasks, the same way I might actually do with a colleague or with a coach or a trainer. Or even a lot of us, we love working with folks that are greener in the field, or junior staff members or interns, because it helps us learn and grow a lot to get to work with someone and get their beginner's mind and fresh point of view, share with them what we've learned, and grow together. And so I found it really helpful to take that point of view in interacting with a generative AI tool. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to go, it's not an order taking system. I'm going to go get this, get an answer, and I'm done. But rather, it's actually a way to hone my thinking and my ability to play and grow in the areas that I'm working in. For the second question, I really appreciate some of my teammates here at Integral. I've been helping with leading some of the work that we've been doing to explore our uses of generative AI and how we do and don't want to use it. And some of them have expressed concerns that they might lose some of their skills or get weaker in using an LLM to do certain things all the time. It's a reasonable concern, right? Where in the future, we don't know how to do something. We don't know which tools to use because we just outsourced all of that to a generative AI tool. And for me, it made me think about that, like often the basic work that we might give to an intern or a junior team member is also how they learn, right? They start doing something that's a heavy doing task and maybe with some guidance. And then in doing that a few times, maybe manually building a roadmap or manually putting together a set of features and stories. That's how you learn, that's how you grow, and then getting feedback on it helps you get even better at it, collaborating together to refine the things you're working on, etc. And for generative AI, there's two things that I'm thinking about here. One is I wouldn't send my kid outside with a chainsaw for the first time that they want to cut down a tree, right? We can practice with loppers or a handsaw, move to a smaller powered saw, and then they might eventually be ready to use a chainsaw. The same is true as we're using generative AI. It's probably worthwhile to be like, hey, wait, even if you're coming in, we already have a way to do this with generative AI. Let's make sure you know how to do it by hand. Let's make sure you're working on this in smaller ways before we throw you into doing a full, big, risky thing with a generative AI tool. Also, it's likely going to continue to be valuable to go back and do something by hand every once in a while to keep your skills strong, or the way I was just describing, at least making sure that you're interactively doing something with a generative AI tool so that you're keeping your own thinking muscles in your practices strong. Reading the question here. Thank you, Ian. So in terms of zero trust policy, I think some of what it's where the analogy helps me. When I go to generative AI, it's as if I'm talking in the analogy I used about security. It's if I'm talking in a public restaurant. And so you want to apply zero trust for me with generative AI in the same way that you would in a restaurant. Don't talk out loud about super secret things in a public place with someone. Don't talk with anyone that hasn't signed an NDA about super secret things, even with sensitive information. But probably okay. Be really cautious, speak generically. It's really important to protect your data. And then as far as what do I see in the future for zero trust policy, I think that's where the not all lumberjacks win idea becomes important to me. I think we've seen this with other tools. It's hard to remember this in some ways, but there's still some companies that really are nervous about putting any of their documents in the cloud. They really don't want to use SharePoint or Google Drive or whatever. But at this point, it's hard to do business if you don't use cloud documents. And I understand it is harder to protect them in the cloud, but you have to keep up. I have a feeling that's some of any security always is a balance between speed and safety, right? And so I think we'll see that be what happens with zero trust policy and how we use generative AI tools in the workplace. You have to use them to be able to go fast enough to get the job done. But then how do we put effective guardrails around them? So I don't think zero trust will work with generative AI because we need to use the tools to win. I do think we have to find effective guardrails to use them. Great question, Ian. Feel free to ask follow-ups if that did not effectively answer the question. So the next waypoint that I want to talk about that helps me as I'm using generative AI tools is to remember that all of the core inputs for machine learning based tools like generative AI are created by humans. Humans write the algorithms, the logic for those. Humans generate and supply all the training data. And humans provide prompts to tell the computer what to do with what it's learning. I realize that world's getting more complex, and now generative AI tools are also often doing things based on data or rules provided to them by other generative AI tools. But even then, there's still a human shell around all of that. And we as humans will still keep existing as humans, as maybe the broader point in how we want to live our lives and want to interact with generative AI tools. So we as humans certainly still drive our future as humans. And we are the ones building and using these generative AI tools and asking them to do things for us. Software that we build in our intellectual work, the kinds of tools that we're creating and that we can use generative AI to help us do harder, better, faster, stronger, are still going to be largely oriented towards making the world a better place for humans, helping us as humans live better, easier, and more enjoyable lives, and making the world safer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that feels important to remember because it leads me to these two questions as we interact with generative AI tools in the ways that we do teamwork, the ways that we live together as humans and work to build the future we want and live in the world we want. First off, how can we make generative AI a team member that we love interacting with and enjoy, to that fear earlier, right, of where generative AI could make our lives awful, but it also could make our lives really great. How do we make it the kind of team member we love? And second question, how do we set our people up for success, ourselves and others on our teams, for success in using generative AI tools? For me, with the first question, we're often finding it really helpful at Integral here to think of generative AI as if it's an extra team member. It's a tool, it's a piece of software, but it's doing the kinds of things that another team member might do in terms of thought partnering, in terms of drafting things, giving feedback on things, ideating on things, etc. And so thinking of it as a fellow team member is somewhat helpful because it allows us to intentionally ask ourselves, what role do we want that team member to play? What does it look like for generative AI to be a good team player alongside all of us as humans, and how do we all interact with this new team member, generative AI team member, in a way that helps everybody work well together, enjoy the work we're doing, and get good results. So that's been a helpful framework in terms of that question for us in approaching how we use generative AI as a tool, particularly because it is a little different than our other tools that are just kind of tools. They don't have the same humanoid features that generative AI tools start to have. So the team member framework has been helpful in going, oh yeah, this is a different kind of tool that feels like you're working with a new team member. So it's helpful to think of it that way. On the second question, I'll share a little bit of lots of folks, including some of us at Integral, early on with generative AI tools coming out, we work on some very sensitive things for some of our clients. We want to protect the code, we want to protect the data that we're working with. And so in order to do that, some companies still don't allow, Ian, to your question, some companies still don't allow any use of generative AI tools and have fully blocked the URLs for them or whatever. And so early on, we advised against doing any of our client work or code-based work on generative AI tools. That way we wouldn't risk violating an NDA or creating any security issues for our clients. We wanted to make sure we were protecting the work we were doing as we were understanding the risks of the tools. We then also quickly realized, like, these tools are really important. We talked a lot about that. I won't say more about it. They're going to change the world. They are changing the world. And we realized that we as integers weren't getting enough at-bats with using the tools. And so we needed to set ourselves up for success by giving some basic guidance. And so we didn't create a 20-page document that no one would read. We created a short one-page-ish with some very clear, concise bullets. Some of the guidance I've been sharing is in that policy that we created to help people feel confident that, hey, here's the way we want to be using generative AI tools, and set us up for success with having some guardrails around how we're going to use generative AI for our work and for our internal work at Integral and for client work, code-based work, et cetera. And we're continuing to kind of refine on what we need to do to keep our usage of generative AI helping us win while being secure and safe, et cetera. So that helps set us up for success. The other thing, I'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end of the talk, is making sure we've been proactively encouraging folks to play with the tools in safer, lower risk areas, off to the side in some way, or where sensitive client information or code isn't at risk. It's really important to set yourself up for success by finding those ways to play and explore, and encouraging your team to find those ways to play and explore so that they can start learning how to use the tools without the risk that they're going to mess something up in a big way. And that way, when it really does matter and it is risky, they know how to use the tools well. So in heading towards closing, the thing for me is I know there's a lot of opportunity here. The generative AI future seems pretty crazy and pretty beautiful to me. I like that it's in the article that I wrote on the same topic about chainsaws and generative AI. And lumberjacks, I love the quote from Dr. Richard Baldwin of generative AI won't take your job, someone using it will. And that can seem like a really cynical quote, but the bright side of the cheeky quote is that we can choose to be the someone using generative AI. We can not have to worry so much about about generative AI taking our job, because we are the someone using the generative AI to be really good at the things that we're really good at. And so here's my take on some of the opportunities that are in front of us. I know as I first started seeing generative AI tools coming out, it was a little overwhelming. Felt like you have to make a plan to take over the world using ChatGPT because it's going to change everything, or you have to be a rocket scientist to figure out all the best ways to use Bard. The reality is that most of us don't have the budget or the motivation to take over the galaxy with the droids. And so instead, I think the reality is we're going to start from where we are and use these tools in small ways to do what we're doing today and to do it better and enjoy it more. So you can trust yourself to go play with the tools using some of the guidance above, how to be secure and safe. Have fun, make do cobbling together the ways that you can make beautiful things with generative AI. Maybe it's helping to ideate an outline for a webinar, like I did with this one, using some generative AI tools to help me build my outline and get some great ideas and then make them my own and then build the content itself. Or maybe it's something as simple as helping you write a poem for a friend or a beautiful fellow human that you want to fall in love with you. There's lots of different ways that you can go play with these tools and use them to make your life a better place. Maybe it's some strategic thinking on a new project and identifying risks and identifying opportunities and getting a thought partner through generative AI to help you with working on that. Or maybe it's helping you learn a new coding language. The key idea is you can start from where you are right now, the things you're trying to do today, and then go play with generative AI and see where it can serve you in doing the things that you need to do today. I think you'll have an easier time getting the right help from generative AI tools, or even knowing how to pick the right generative AI tool if you have really good clarity on your niche and use cases. Like if I said, hey, grab 2 of these tools in this picture right here, and let's go get it done. I'd hope that your first question would be, what are we getting done? And generative AI tools are the same, right? Like you need to know what you're doing to know which tools is to use and how to use them. So it's really important to get clear first on your goals, what problems you care about solving and how you want to do your best work, what your definition of done, your success criteria, your acceptance criteria are. Then based on that, you'll be in a strong position to decide which generative AI tools will help you do that and how to use them to help you do that. So I also think that it's important to be intentional about where you fall in terms of the kind of tier of tool you choose to use, to pay for, how much customization you do, et cetera. Based on your niche and use cases, you might be good, for example, with a cheap seat on a publicly available airline or tool like ChatGPT or Bard. And in fact, if you're even just kind of playing around and using it day to day, honestly, the free paper plane version of ChatGPT or Bard is probably good enough for a lot of what you're going to do. It takes a more specific use case to justify the private jet enterprise version that I mentioned earlier of LLM tool, but you might need that. And if you have access to one through your employer, definitely enjoy using it. And I also think there are the other worthy note about which kinds of tools you choose here. There's very specific purpose-built plugins. I feel like we get a lot of attention right now on ChatGPT, Bard, other big publicly available tools. There's also a lot of people doing really cool purpose-built plugins that you can add to your browser or to your computer, or specific built-in tools for things like Google Suite or Notion or Miro or Figma. They're often free or very cheap, kind of like how my daughter wants this very specific flying fairy for Christmas. She's good with that instead of an airplane. And they're cute, they're useful, they're fun, they can bring you joy, they can help make a little part of your day easier and better. I will note, especially with some of the things that are plugins or whatever, it is worthwhile, again, to think about the knowing your data and knowing what data you're sharing and how you're sharing it. Can be really easy to make a mistake, and people already have made mistakes where you go grab a cheap or a free plugin from the internet and you don't pay attention to all of what you're giving it access to on your systems, and you cause yourself data breach or security problems or violate an NDA or whatever, because you brought in a plugin or a tool without paying attention to what you're giving it access to. So that part's really important to be useful. That said, some of those tools are really awesome and they give you really helpful things in very specific parts of what you could use generative AI help with. And then final thought on this is the DIY side of things. So to use the example of drones here, like for my kids and I, like a cheap Amazon drone like this one is great. Like we just want to be able to learn how to fly it, capture some silly and cool pics and videos and whatever. It's fun. And this is plenty enough for us right out of the box. It does everything we need it to do. However, if you're a farmer who's looking to use a drone to spray specific parts of your field or whatever, you might need to add custom sized reservoirs or certain materials that can hold certain chemicals, and specialized spray nozzles depending on what and where you're trying to spray and what you need there. And so talking to some of my friends that work in agriculture, they may buy a drone off the shelf, a larger agricultural drone like this, and still do a lot of customization to it. So what's really cool is in the world of generative AI tools, a lot of that kind of DIY customization is also becoming available. Google and OpenAI, for example, both offer some ability to configure their ML models and ML tools to respond to your specific prompts, to even do some custom training. So you sort of have your own version of the generative AI tool that plays the way you want it to play. I'd say it's worth, if you're going to be using these tools, especially if you're going to be using them a lot, or you have important use cases, specific use cases you want to use a tool, it's definitely worth exploring these kind of DIY configurations you can put over a tool like ChatGPT or Bard effectively. That makes it work exactly more the way you want it to work in your software development efforts or intellectual work efforts. Last thing I'll share, I mentioned I would come back to this, is the importance of learning and low risk experimentation. Built out a camper van a couple of years ago and made a mistake early on. I was nervous because it felt very high risk to me to cut into the side of the van. I've done a bunch of house renovation, but I've never worked in a vehicle before. And so when I started building out the camper van, I got the outside of it painted and I thought, oh, I don't want to have to cut into the side of the van. I know I need to install this AC unit is what this thingy is, and this vent fan on the roof. So I'll just pay the body shop. They're experts at cutting into the side of vehicles like this. I'll pay them to just cut the hole and install them for me. They were willing to do it. And I was really glad to have taken this high risk thing and starting to build my camper van and have someone else do it. So we got the outside painted, got these two things installed, and it was great until you can see this thing sticks down really far, the AC unit, and the fan is like flush up against the ceiling, but you come in and out right here in this side door and into the van a lot. And I bang my head every time on this AC unit sticking down. It drives me crazy. It's awful. I bang my head on it more times than we really need to talk about. And so I did a high risk thing and tried to get rid of the risk, but I really wasn't ready yet. The body shop didn't know enough about camper vans. I suppose I could have gone to a specific camper van place and had them do all that. All honestly, they might have made the same mistake, maybe not. But I didn't know enough about camper vans. The body shop didn't know enough about camper vans. And so we made a mistake in a high risk thing. And you can't move these. There's a big hole cut there and you can't put the sheet metal back. It's really hard to fix this once you've done it. They're pretty much stuck where they are in the position they're in now, and I'll keep banging my head. However, we did learn some lessons from that as we were banging our head on the unit, and we did a lot more low risk experimentation throughout the rest of our van build out that made it fun. And we had a riot doing this. It's been awesome the last couple of years building out this van, but that gave us the low risk places to experiment. So for example, we didn't just start by trying to cut the floorboards because we would have gone through tons of plywood, trying to get it exactly right in these wonky shapes that you need to put inside the van floor. Instead, we started with cardboard. Just started keeping all of our boxes from packages we got, went to the recycle center and grabbed some more big boxes when we needed them. And we just templated things like the floor in cardboard. You can go through a lot of cardboard. It's cheap, it's easy, it's fast to cut. Every time you make a mistake, oh, well, you just start over again with scissors. It's wonderful. And then once we had a template that we were sure about, we'd done the low risk experimentation, we had the shape of the floor, we could cut it in the plywood. We could use the plywood to do the vinyl floor, which is even riskier since that's finish and really expensive and takes a long time to get when you order it, especially that this was in like 2021 when everything took forever to get. So we knew we couldn't mess that up. And so we had already the exact shape of the floor in the plywood that we could trace onto the vinyl. I could give a ton of other examples of ways that we gave ourselves low risk ways to play around with something so that then when we had to do the final you couldn't change it thing, we knew what we were doing and we were confident and we could do it right. And for me, the proud moment here, this hole on the side of my van is about a window that we're about to install, and I cut that hole myself. Originally, I was not confident enough to do that with the vent fan or the AC unit. I didn't have enough experience. I hadn't given myself enough learning and low risk experimentation spaces to feel confident to cut a hole like that. By the time we got around doing the window, it certainly was still nerve-wracking, but I knew what I needed to do. I'd done enough research. I had enough experience to be ready to cut this hole myself. And then we installed the window, and years later, it's still working great. And we're so glad we have that window there. The point of all this is, as you're thinking about using generative AI tools, do the same thing for yourself and for your teams. Identify safer spaces where y'all can fail. Where you can go and play and learn. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to mess things up. Assume that's going to happen and find the safe spaces where you can do that low risk experimentation. In fact, we encourage folks, we have in our Slack channels and often in our demos, we're demoing ways that you're sharing in the channels, ways that we're using tools, what worked, what didn't, what went awful, and we'll never do it that way again. Or, wow, this is pretty exciting and everyone else should try it this way too. And we're all learning together about the ways to use these tools in low risk experimentation. I think it's incredibly important that we set up these spaces for each other so that we learn how to use these tools well, and then can use them when it matters to help us win at the work that we're doing. And that's what I have to share with you today.